So this is going to be our last section on the abolition of man. We'll pretend we did that right. So we talked about the first two sections. You probably have already read through those or listened to those if we're here. So here's this third section where Lewis opens up untangling what he thinks it means for man to have conquered nature. He sees it not as we would normally see conquering, like you would see one country conquer another, but rather the ability of man to use nature to impose power over another man. The quote he's going to use here is that it's commonplace to complain that man have hitherto used badly the powers that science has given them. Even that, though, doesn't really distract us from Lewis's main point, the concept of man's power over nature. What does that actually mean? To better understand this, Lewis explains this from an instant to instant relation of man to nature. It's a longer timeline, right? So he says it's from the date of man's emergence to that of its extinction. That's the timeline this power over nature is going to be looking at. In this way, Lewis is arguing that man will cumulatively increase in power through advances in science, and power is going to concentrate as we go further down the timeline, which makes sense, right? As we go further, more advancements, more power. And as power concentrates, those people who will control humanity more and more as power concentrates more and more into them until this control is total and complete. So man's conquest of nature in the dream, this is a quote from Lewis, man's conquest of nature, if the dreams of some scientific planners are realized, means the rule of a few hundreds of men over billions upon billions of men. Here he's returning to the fact that any power man has over nature extends to power over his fellow man. The final stage of man's conquest of nature is when man, according to Lewis, uses, through eugenics, by prenatal conditioning, and by an education and propaganda based on a perfect applied psychology, has obtained full control over himself. If we remember in part 2, he was talking about these conditioners who will eventually completely subdue human nature as they conquer each piece to take one step closer to, here we have our title, the ultimate abolition of man. This idea of power concentrating, we see this in a lot of dystopian science fiction. You might remember the idea of eugenics or prenatal conditioning in something like Gattaca. So this is not a new idea by any means. These conditioners are operating outside of what Lewis was calling the Tao, this general unified idea of ethics, and the conditioners are going to step by step reshape humanity until nothing will remain of what we think of humanity today. So how does this relate to what we were talking about in the first two sections? We're taking those ideas, the essence of something, and applying it to humanity. For humans, there is something more than just this pure, raw science, just like we saw when Lewis was talking about the waterfall, right? How there's an essence to that waterfall, and it's not just, water being affected by gravity. There's something inherent in nature that is separate from what man can make, create, or draw into existence. Just like we saw the Green Book reject these qualities in the waterfall, that's the first step in this dystopian view of conquering nature, and mirrored in that final same stage of that conquest when it comes to man, where we lose the beauty of and awe that we have and reverence for the waterfall, for the stars, for whatever. The same thing happens with man. So this is not this is sort of a symptom of abandoning this Tao, this global consciousness, right? Once the conditioners abandon the Tao, it's a conscious decision. But what Lewis was seeing initially in the Green Book lays that initial philosophical groundwork by rejecting these objective values. So what is the abolition of man doing here? This is Lewis raising a red flag in hopes that humanity is going to reject this idea of subjectivism before the conditioners can follow this logical conclusion of abandoning the Tao, these general ethics. Lewis says that the conditioners have sacrificed their own share in traditional humanity in order to devote themselves to the task of deciding what humanity shall henceforth mean. It's not a decision that they're beyond good or evil like a cartoon villain. Um, it's rejecting the very idea, not just of good or bad, but beauty, justice, fairness, all of that. The conditioners are rejecting anything with this objective value. It's what separates them from men, according to Lewis. It's not that they're bad, they're something worse. Lewis says that they're not men at all. By stepping outside the town, they have stepped into the void. They are artifacts. Man's final conquest of nature has proved to be the abolition of man. Again, we're rejecting this objective value and the Tao. And the only outcome that Lewis sees by that is that the conditioners now operate outside this moral framework that unites and defines humanity. Later on, when you finish reading the first three sections, you can read the section on the Tao where Lewis lays out what he sees as that those objective values and that moral framework. He pulls from a bunch of different sources to show that these ideas are found throughout different societies, different cultures, and that's what he's calling the Tao. But the conditioners aren't going to act in the way you might think of a corrupt politician or a degenerate gambler. Those still imply moral virtues that these bad actors have. The conditioners don't make value judgments per se. Their judgments are arbitrary, they're whims, they're personal, and they're ephemeral. There's no structure or guiding principle. They reject any standard, whether moral or rational. Lewis says that our hope of even a conditioned happiness rests on what is ordinarily called chance, the chance that benevolent impulses may on the whole predominate our conditioners. So that's something that Lewis proves to be very skeptical about. And I think most people would be skeptical that if all of this power has concentrated in these conditioners, that they're going to be benevolent dictators. Especially because Lewis points out that if you put people with no concept of these common values or the Tao in charge, they're not going to see humans in the same way you or I are going to see humans. They're going to think of them just like the conditioners are, as artifacts, manipulatable objects. When we normal humans who haven't, surrendered, as Lewis says, these values, we find ourselves shaped by them and we operate within it, and our rational decisions are informed by it. We may not be perfectly good, but we still understand what is good, what is bad. The conditioners are explicitly rejecting this idea at all. They have no standards for how they choose to control humanity, and they're arbitrary and capricious might be a good term for it. Lewis paints us a pretty bleak picture, saying there will be no second revolt against nature, but all snug beneath the conditioners, and the conditioners beneath nature till the moon falls or the sun grows cold. Basically, Lewis thinks that if man chooses to treat himself as raw material will he will be. This is a damning warning about stripping humanity from man, and the danger, of course, being that the people who are shaping these raw material are, not the sort of people you want making decisions. They don't view you as a person. You're a resource. You're no different than, a rock or something. The conditioners will have a dogmatic belief in Lewis warns that a dogmatic belief in objective value is necessary to the very idea of a rule which is not tyranny or an obedience which is not slavery. The conquest of nature strips nature of its core qualitative properties, Lewis is asserting. He says that the great minds know very well that the object, so treated, is an artificial abstraction, that something of its reality has been lost. Just like the waterfall, removing quality from people makes us no different than just any other object. So Lewis's definition of nature here is that nature is both the physical world and all its wonders and human nature. The wonder and beauty of a star are both essential and intrinsic parts of what makes a star, right? If you simply see it by weighing it or measuring it or how long its light takes to reach Earth, you erase these qualities, this wonder that gives it its inherent starness. So if we reduce something to a pure scientific mechanical thing, and if we do that with humans, we are removing something that makes us uniquely have a uniquely human experience. Lewis likens it to giving up our soul to get power in return, just ends with us being soulless. Here, there's a brief aside where Lewis tries to defend against some arguments he sees coming. We'll go over those very quickly. First, he sees that this promotion of objective value as something being anti science is one argument he proposes will be raised against how he's trying to defend the idea of Tao. His defense here is that magic and science, magic and applied science alike, show that the problem is how to view problems and how to subdue reality to the wishes of man. The solution is a technique, and both in the practice of this technique, both here being magic and applied science, are ready to do things hitherto regarded as disgusting and impious. So he's going to compare Bacon's writings with Faustus, noting that knowledge is never the end in itself. It's a method to exert control over reality. So Lewis is asking whether we can imagine a new natural philosophy that is going to respect the Tao in a way that avoids this cost of sacrificing ethics or value or the Tao for knowledge. He wants us to find this as finding a way to conquer nature without being at the same time conquered by her, and by knowledge at a lower cost than that of life. That's putting a nice little bow on what Lewis's whole argument has been through all three of these sections, is that yes, it's important for us to learn more, to expand, to get in touch with our humanness and to all of this, but it can't be at the expense of that thing that makes us uniquely human, and we can't sacrifice that for whatever good we think we can get for making that trade. In short, the Tao here is being seen as an essential quality of man. It defines our moral nature, and if you reduce man to something less than that moral nature, that's a dangerous prospect, as it removes the quality that gives us both discernment and virtue. Rejecting the Tao will lead to the abolition of man, maybe not immediately, but inevitably it will. We don't have to give up rationality and science to keep our humanity, Lewis is arguing, but we have to guard against letting ourselves being so taken with these ideas, with the idea of knowledge, with the idea of this pure efficiency that he warns these conditioners might propose and might pursue, that we lose humanity, that thing that anchors us to finding purpose, both in our own lives and in the very knowledge, nature, world we exist in and we pursue to understand. So there you have it, our 3 sections on the abolition of man. Again, I'll probably try and do more of these book reports. I enjoy doing them. They just are kind of time consuming, and I had some extra time today to wrap up this 3rd part. So yeah, what else? I don't know what the next one will be. If anything, I'm trying to read, churn through. I've got a bookshelf. I have all of the Spelljammer, I think most of the Dragonlance comics. I've got a bunch of stuff to read, so I don't know what I'll do a book report on next. But there you go. Sorry it took so long.